My name is Ruth, and if you had met me just a few months ago, you probably would have thought I had it all figured out. A stable career, a small circle of close friends, and a quiet life that, at least on the surface, seemed completely normal. But life has a way of flipping your world upside down in the most unexpected ways, and mine shattered in a single afternoon. It all started in the cold marble office of my father, a man who had built an empire brick by brick, but who never once looked at me as his daughter, only as a disappointment. I remember the sharpness of his words as if they were carved into stone. "Your brother is the only heir." He said it with such finality, as though I was nothing more than a shadow in the corner of his perfect legacy. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to remind him of every moment I had been there when my brother wasn't, of every sacrifice I had made in silence. But the weight of his rejection pressed down on me harder than any argument I could form. And then, almost cruelly timed by fate itself, my phone lit up, the name of my bank flashing across the screen like a warning I didn't yet understand. My hands trembled as I answered, my father's words still echoing in my ears. What they told me next didn't just confirm his betrayal. It opened a door to a truth I had never imagined, one that would drag me into a storm of secrets, lies, and choices that would test every part of who I am. That call was the beginning, and nothing about my life would ever be the same again. I know you've probably been through moments when life slapped you with a truth you weren't ready to hear. Maybe it came from someone you trusted, maybe from someone you loved, or maybe from someone you thought would always stand by your side. That's why I'm sharing this story with you. Not because it's easy to relive, but because I believe you'll see yourself somewhere inside it. My name is Ruth, I'm 36 years old, and this is the chapter of my life that began the day my father told me I was nothing, and the bank proved that everything I thought I knew was a lie. This isn't just about money or inheritance, it's about betrayal, about identity, about finding out who you are when the people who should love you the most turn their backs on you. What happened after that call changed not just my relationship with my family, but also my understanding of myself. And I promise you, as painful as it was, it revealed a strength I didn't know I had. So if you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or made to feel invisible, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to share is not just a story, it's a journey, one filled with heartbreak, revelations, and decisions that could have destroyed me, but instead forced me to rise. Before we dive in, I want to ask you for something small but powerful. Subscribe to this channel, not just to follow my story, but to be part of a community where we face truths together even when they hurt. Hit that button, because I promise you, what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and love. I left my father's office with my chest tight, the echo of his voice drilling into my skull. "Your brother is the only heir." Those words weren't just a decision about money or property. They were a verdict on my existence. As the heavy oak doors closed behind me, I felt the weight of every year I had spent trying to earn his approval. My heels clicked against the marble floor of the hallway, a sound that seemed too sharp, too loud in the silence that followed his pronouncement. I wanted to believe I had misheard him, that perhaps there was room for negotiation, but deep down, I knew he meant it. To him, I was already erased. For as long as I can remember, my father had been a man of impossible standards. Success wasn't celebrated in our house. It was expected, demanded, and rarely acknowledged. My brother Daniel wore the crown of favoritism with ease, groomed from the beginning to follow in Dad's footsteps. I was the afterthought, the consolation prize, the one who existed but never quite fit into the grand narrative of his empire. As a child, I used to wait for him to notice me. One of my drawings, a report card, anything. But his eyes always passed over me like I was furniture. Over time, I stopped trying. Or at least I told myself I did. The phone buzzed in my hand again, dragging me out of memory. The bank. Their timing was merciless. My father's words hadn't even settled before the universe decided to twist the knife deeper. With trembling fingers, I answered, bracing myself for something mundane, like an overdraft notice or a minor account error. But the voice on the other end was measured, professional, almost too calm for the storm it was about to unleash. "Ms. Carter, the representative began. "We need to verify some unusual activity in your accounts." Unusual activity. 2 words that froze me mid-step in that pristine hallway. My father's rejection was still slicing me open, but now my financial security, the one area of my life I thought was mine alone, was under threat. My mind raced. Had my card been cloned? Was it some small fraud issue? I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as if the closeness could protect me from what was coming. The representative continued. "There have been several large withdrawals in the past week, all linked to your authorization. Are you aware of these transactions?" My heart dropped. No, I wasn't. I leaned against the cold wall, struggling to steady my breath. "No, I didn't make any withdrawals. How much are we talking about?" The pause on the other end felt like a lifetime, a silence so loaded it made my skin prickle. Finally, the voice replied, "Over $250,000. The air left my lungs in a rush. That was practically everything I had saved, scraped together over years of work, careful planning, and sacrifices. Gone. Just like that. I felt the ground slipping beneath me. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had mixed up my account with someone else's. I gave them every detail, my date of birth, my social security number, the security questions, but the representative's tone never wavered. It was my account, my authorization, my fingerprints, digitally recorded, matching the withdrawals. Somehow, someone had done this, and done it perfectly. I sank onto a bench in the hallway, my phone pressed against my ear, my whole body trembling. My father's rejection and this revelation blurred together until I couldn't tell which pain was sharper. When the call ended, I sat there in silence, my hands cold, my mind spiraling. Who could have done this? The only people with access to certain details of my life were family, maybe close colleagues. A thought I didn't want to entertain began to creep in, dark and poisonous. Could Daniel have had something to do with it? He had the charm, the connections, the audacity. He also had my father's unshakable protection, a shield that made him untouchable no matter what he did. My stomach churned. Was this just a coincidence, or was it part of something bigger? I tried to remember the last time I had checked my account. Maybe a week ago? I had been so busy I hadn't thought twice about it. My life wasn't extravagant, but I lived comfortably, and I trusted that the money I had worked so hard for was safe. That trust had vanished now, ripped away with a single phone call. I thought of the bills waiting, the rent, the small projects I had been planning. Everything was suddenly uncertain. It wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing stability, control, and trust in the systems I had relied on. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my computer screen, refreshing my bank account as if staring at the numbers would bring them back. I called the bank again, filed fraud reports, set alerts, did everything they told me to do. But the hole in my balance stared back at me, mocking me. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in the dark, hearing my father's voice on a loop, hearing the bank's measured tone, feeling crushed between two forces that had no mercy for me. I was invisible to one, exploited by the other. The next morning, the weight hadn't lifted. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy, my mind buzzing with questions I couldn't answer. I wanted to call Daniel, to demand answers, but I knew he would only laugh it off or twist the blame back onto me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected, that my father's words and the bank's call weren't just unfortunate timing, but threads of a larger web I had stumbled into without realizing. And somewhere inside me, a dangerous curiosity began to spark. If I pulled at those threads, what would unravel? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing in my family happens by accident. And I was about to discover just how deep those connections really ran. The day after the bank's call, I walked into their branch downtown, clutching every piece of documentation I could find. I was determined to face this head-on. Sitting across from the customer service desk, I explained everything. The call, the withdrawals, my certainty that none of it was mine. The woman in front of me nodded politely, typing away at her computer, but her rehearsed tone made me feel like just another problem in a long list she had to get through before lunch. "These are authenticated transactions, Ms. Carter," she repeated, as if that closed the case. My voice trembled, but I refused to give in. Someone is using my identity, I insisted. Her polite smile didn't falter, but her words cut deeper than any expression. Perhaps you shared your information without realizing. A family member, maybe? The way she lingered on the word family made my stomach twist. Was it intuition, or was she hinting at something she couldn't say out loud? I wanted to slam my hands on the desk and scream that I wasn't careless, that my life wasn't an open door for anyone to walk through. But instead, I nodded and asked to see the authorization logs. She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. My blood ran cold. The digital signature matched mine. Perfectly. How could that be? My fingerprint, my passcodes, my ID, all recorded as if I had been the one making every withdrawal. For a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Could I have done something without remembering? No. I knew myself better than that. Someone had gone beyond fraud. Someone had access to me in ways I hadn't even imagined. And in that moment, only one face flashed in my mind. Daniel. My brother. The golden son. The untouchable heir. He had always known how to bend rules without consequences. Could he have gone this far? Memories flooded me, moments when Daniel had brushed me aside, mocked me for being too serious, too soft. He had a way of making me doubt myself, of twisting every situation until I felt small and foolish. I remembered being 12, finding him sneaking into Dad's office late at night. He told me it was none of my business, threatened me to keep quiet. I did, because fear had been drilled into me since I was a child. But that memory felt different now, sharper, like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Had he been learning to manipulate things long before we realized? I left the bank with more questions than answers, my folder of documents feeling heavier in my arms. Outside, the city bustled around me, indifferent to the storm inside my chest. I wanted to call Daniel right then, to confront him, but a deeper fear held me back. If he was involved, confronting him without proof would only push him further into defense, maybe even make him erase whatever trail existed. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to find a way to follow the money. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out like a battlefield. Statements, receipts, notes from my call with the bank. It was all there, but none of it told me who had done this. My laptop screen glowed, casting shadows across my apartment as I searched for financial tracking tools, ways to trace digital signatures, anything that might give me leverage. Every result reminded me how powerless I really was compared to whoever had orchestrated this. But then, buried in the logs, I noticed something odd. The withdrawals weren't random. They followed a pattern, each one made within minutes of stock market openings, as if the money was being funneled directly into trades. My pulse quickened. Whoever had taken my savings wasn't just spending recklessly. They were investing, and that meant they had a plan, a strategy. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the times and amounts with public records. That's when I saw it. The same company name repeating in the trail, Carter Holdings, my father's empire. The blood drained from my face. My money hadn't disappeared into thin air. It had been funneled into the very machine that excluded me. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. Not only had my father erased me with his words, but someone, Daniel, it had to be Daniel, had siphoned away my future to strengthen the empire that had already shut me out. My savings, my independence, my lifeline had been turned into bricks for his kingdom. Tears blurred my vision, but anger burned hotter beneath them. This wasn't just theft. It was humiliation, the cruelest kind of silencing. They wanted me invisible, powerless, stripped of any chance to stand on my own. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. The realization pressed down on me. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just Daniel's doing. My father had to know. The bank's deference, the perfect digital authorizations, the convenient funneling into his company's accounts. It was too precise to be anything else. I had been betrayed not just by my brother, but by the very man who had looked me in the eye and told me I didn't matter. He hadn't just said it, he had made it reality. And that was when the spark of curiosity from the night before ignited into something far more dangerous. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. If they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. The question was, how far was I willing to go to uncover the truth? Sleep became a stranger in the days that followed. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice declaring Daniel the heir, followed by the sterile calm of the banker confirming that my savings were gone. The two voices overlapped until I could no longer separate rejection from betrayal. I woke up drenched in sweat, my body trembling with the sense that I was running out of time. Each morning, I checked my accounts again, hoping for a mistake, a correction, some sign that the nightmare had ended. But the numbers didn't lie. My money had been swallowed whole. I knew I couldn't keep circling the pain. I had to move. The problem was, where to start? I couldn't just storm into my father's office without proof. He would laugh me out of the room, dismiss me as dramatic, unstable. Daniel would smirk, maybe even applaud the performance, and I would leave more broken than I arrived. No, this had to be calculated. So I returned to the paper trail. Night after night, I traced transactions, followed dates, compared movements. That's when I noticed something chilling. The withdrawals aligned not only with Carter Holdings' activity, but with specific ventures tied to shell companies I had never heard of. Curiosity pulled me deeper, but fear tightened around me like a vice. Who was I to dig into financial structures designed to be invisible? If my father and Daniel had orchestrated this, then I was prying into something dangerous, something they didn't want me to see. Yet the more I uncovered, the less I could look away. Every new connection felt like proof that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. And yet, the isolation of it was crushing. Who could I turn to? Friends? No one in my circle would understand the scale of this. The police? What could I say? That my billionaire family had stolen my savings. They would laugh me out of the station. The loneliness pressed hard, but it also fueled me. For so long, I had been silent, letting their voices define me. Now, with everything stripped away, I realized I had nothing left to lose. I pulled out an old notebook, the one I used to keep as a teenager when I wrote down my feelings because no one in the house wanted to hear them. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. If they want me gone, they'll have to fight harder. It was childish, maybe even foolish, but it steadied me. My voice, however small, still existed. It was during one of these late-night investigations that I stumbled upon something that made my hands go cold. Among the shell companies, one name appeared that I hadn't expected: Hart and Lowell Consulting. At first it seemed irrelevant, just another piece in a corporate labyrinth. But then I remembered. Hart and Lowell was the firm that had handled the settlement of my mother's estate years ago. My chest tightened. My mother, who had died when I was barely out of high school, had left behind a small inheritance in my name. Or so I thought. Could it be that the same structures now stealing from me had also touched what was hers? The memory of her funeral came rushing back. The cold rain, Daniel standing beside my father like a soldier, and me clutching the folded flag of a service she had never received because Dad insisted appearances mattered more than truth. Back then, I didn't understand half the conversations about assets, accounts, holdings. I only knew I was promised something, a safety net my mother had intended for me. But it never materialized. My father told me it was complicated, that legal processes took time. Eventually, the subject faded, buried under years of silence. But now, seeing Hart and Lowell tied to the withdrawals from my account, I felt sick. Had my inheritance already been stolen once before? The thought was unbearable, but it also lit a fire. If my father and Daniel had stolen from me twice, first through my mother, now through my savings, then this wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. They wanted me dependent, voiceless, disposable. That realization tore through me like lightning. My mother had tried to leave me something, a lifeline, and they had buried it under lies. The weight of it pressed on my chest until I could barely breathe, but beneath the suffocation was rage. And rage, for the first time, felt like fuel. Still, fear whispered in the background. If they were capable of this, what else could they do? What would happen if they discovered I was digging? I couldn't shake the paranoia that eyes were on me, that every keystroke, every late-night search was being watched. My father had the means. Daniel had the audacity. And I was caught between them, one small misstep away from being crushed completely. But even with fear clawing at me, I couldn't stop, because the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Silence was no longer an option. I began keeping copies of everything: screenshots, notes, printouts. I hid them in places I hoped neither of them would think to look. The paranoia of secrecy made me feel like a teenager again, sneaking around in my own house, afraid of the footsteps echoing in the hallway. But this wasn't childish rebellion. This was survival. Every page I tucked away felt like insurance, a small shield against the storm I was sure was coming. And then came the detail I couldn't ignore. A transfer marked with Daniel's signature, not digital, but physical. A scanned document buried in the logs, a paper trail that should never have existed. My heart hammered as I zoomed in on the image. His handwriting, his flourish on the D. Proof, real proof, that he was tied directly to the money trail. I sat there, staring at the screen, torn between victory and terror. If I had found this, it meant there was more. And if there was more, then I was standing at the edge of a truth far darker than I imagined. The question wasn't just about what they had taken from me anymore. It was about what they were hiding. And I knew, with a clarity that chilled me, that digging deeper would change everything. The discovery of Daniel's signature haunted me for days. I kept staring at the printed copy, running my fingers over the ink as if touching it would make the betrayal less surreal. Proof. I had something tangible now, but proof alone meant nothing unless I understood the full scope of what they were doing. My instincts told me that this trail went back further, deeper, back to a time when I was too young to question, too obedient to challenge, and every road seemed to lead back to my mother. One Saturday morning, I drove to the storage unit where I had kept boxes of her belongings for years. Dust clung to every surface, and the air was heavy with that stale scent of forgotten things. Opening those boxes felt like tearing open wounds I had never allowed to heal. There were photo albums, her favorite scarves, letters she had written but never sent. And at the bottom of one box, wrapped in a faded blue shawl, I found a folder marked in her handwriting. For Ruth, when she's ready. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements, notes scribbled in the margins, legal letters. The dates lined up with the months before her death. My chest tightened as I read her words, her neat handwriting explaining how she had set aside an inheritance for me, separate from the family fortune, something that could never be touched by my father's empire. She wrote about her fears, how she had seen Daniel growing too much like his father, how she worried I would be erased. It was as if she had known what was coming, had tried to shield me from it. And yet, somehow, that inheritance had disappeared. I traced the accounts she listed, cross-referencing them with the shell companies I had been investigating. My stomach turned. The money had been siphoned into Carter Holdings within months of her death, the exact same pattern as my own savings now. It wasn't random. It wasn't new. My father had done this before, and Daniel had learned from him. I felt the room spin as the truth settled in. My life had been scripted by their thefts from the very beginning. Even my mother's last attempt to protect me had been stolen. Tears blurred my vision, but anger carried me forward. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of every page, determined that this time the evidence wouldn't vanish. Among the papers, I found a letter my mother had addressed to her lawyer, never mailed. In it, she begged for help, wrote about being pressured, manipulated, silenced. The words cut into me like blades. She had fought, just as I was fighting now. And just like me, she had been ignored, swallowed by the shadow of my father's empire. Driving back home, I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. For Ruth, when she's ready. Had she known it would take me decades to be ready? That I would need to be pushed to the edge of despair to finally open the folder? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ready or not, I was in this now, and there was no turning back. That night, I spread the documents across my living room floor, pairing them with the newer records from my account. The patterns were undeniable. Every line pointed to a machine that had been perfected over years, one designed to strip me of anything that was ever mine. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure of identity, carefully orchestrated, generation after generation. My father had built his empire on lies, on silencing voices, starting with my mother's, now continuing with mine. The rage inside me no longer felt like fire. It felt like steel, cold, sharp, unbreakable. Still, fear whispered at the edges. If I had found this, what would they do if they realized? Would they come after me openly? Or worse, would they make me disappear quietly the way they had made her voice vanish? I couldn't shake the sense that I was in over my head, a single woman trying to fight against an empire built on power, money, and intimidation. But every doubt was drowned out by a single truth. If I didn't fight, then they would win. And my mother's last attempt to protect me would die with me. I decided to take the risk. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, someone outside of the circles my father controlled. Sitting in that office, I laid out what I had: the bank logs, Daniel's signature, my mother's documents. The lawyer listened carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with every page he turned. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You understand what this means, don't you? If what you're showing me is true, this isn't just a case of fraud. It's conspiracy, embezzlement, possibly worse." His words were both a validation and a warning. Leaving his office, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I finally had someone who believed me, heavier because I understood the stakes now. This wasn't just family drama or financial theft. It was a crime woven into the very foundation of Carter Holdings. And if I was right, exposing it would shake everything. Not just my family, but the empire my father had spent his life building. The question was, could I survive the fallout? Because as much as I had uncovered, I couldn't escape the feeling that there was still more, something even darker waiting just beneath the surface. And I was about to find out exactly what that was. The decision to confront Daniel didn't come lightly. For nights, I rehearsed what I would say, imagining the smirk on his face, the dismissive wave of his hand. He had always thrived on control, on twisting words until the truth bent in his favor. But this time, I wasn't coming empty-handed. This time, I had evidence: my mother's documents, the bank logs, his signature. I couldn't predict how he would react, but I knew one thing: silence was no longer an option. I called him early on a Thursday morning, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk, face to face." There was a pause. Then his chuckle echoed through the line. "Finally growing a spine, Ruth? Fine. My office. Noon." The arrogance in his tone lit the fire in my chest even brighter. As I hung up, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a battle, one I might not walk away from unscathed. Walking into his office felt like stepping onto enemy territory. The walls were lined with certificates, awards, photographs of him shaking hands with powerful men. Every detail screamed validation, recognition, the kind I had never received. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes glinting with amusement as I entered. "So, little sister," he drawled, "what's the crisis this time?" My fists clenched, but I forced my voice to remain calm. I laid the folder on his desk, each page sliding out like a blade. He flipped through them, his smirk never wavering. "You've been busy," he said finally, tossing the papers back as if they were meaningless. "But you don't understand, Ruth. You never have. This," he gestured around him, at the empire he helped run. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. You're just collateral." The words sliced deeper than I expected. Collateral. That's what I was to him. To both of them. A name to erase, a life to discard. Rage broke through my calm. "You stole from me. You stole from Mom. Do you even care what she wanted from me?" His smile faltered for the first time. A shadow passed over his expression, quickly masked, but I caught it. "Mom was weak," he snapped, his voice sharper now. "She didn't understand Dad's vision. She tried to separate you, to protect you, but all she did was make you a liability. We cleaned up her mistakes, and now we're cleaning up yours." The floor seemed to fall away beneath me. His words confirmed what I had feared, but never allowed myself to believe. My mother hadn't simply been overpowered. She had been deliberately silenced, her attempts to protect me twisted into a narrative of weakness. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me to the bone. "You think Dad just cut you out of the will because he doesn't like you? No, Ruth. It's because you were never supposed to matter. Not to him, not to this family, and if you keep digging, you'll regret it." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His eyes bore into mine, cold and merciless, daring me to break. But instead of fear, something else surged through me: defiance. My hands trembled as I gathered the papers back into the folder, holding them against my chest like armor. "You can erase me from the company, from the inheritance, from your perfect little empire," I said, my voice cracking but strong, "but you will not erase me from myself, and you will not bury Mom's voice again." Daniel laughed, but there was no amusement in it this time. It was forced, sharp, like glass breaking. "You really don't get it, do you? This family isn't built on love or fairness. It's built on power, and power doesn't care about your feelings." He stood, towering over me, his presence suffocating. "Walk away, Ruth. That's the smartest thing you can do. Otherwise, you won't like what happens next." I left his office with my knees weak, my heart pounding. Every word he had spoken replayed in my head, each one heavier than the last. But beneath the fear, I felt a strange clarity. He had admitted it, maybe not in legal terms, maybe not in a way I could use in court, but enough to confirm what I already knew. My mother had been right. I wasn't imagining it. They had built their empire by silencing voices, and mine was next on the list. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, staring out at the city lights. For the first time, I understood the depth of what I was up against. This wasn't just about money, it was about survival. My father and Daniel had written me out of their story, but I still had a pen in my hand. And as long as I had that, I had a chance to write my own ending. The real question was no longer if I would fight, but how far I was willing to go. When I look back at everything that has happened, the rejection in my father's office, the merciless call from the bank, the sleepless nights spent chasing invisible trails, I realized something I never thought I'd admit. All of it, every wound, every betrayal, every cruel word, forced me to meet a part of myself I had buried for years, the part that refuses to stay silent. For so long, I lived in the shadow of their empire, convinced that if I just tried harder, I would be seen. But now I know the truth. They were never going to see me. I had to see myself. The evidence I hold today is more than documents. It is the proof that my mother fought for me until her last breath, that she knew this storm was coming and left me pieces of a shield I was too young to understand. She wasn't weak, as Daniel claimed. She was stronger than both of them because she tried to leave behind not power, not wealth, but love. And that love is the reason I'm still standing. It is the reason I refuse to let them erase me. I won't pretend I'm not afraid. I am. Every day I wake up with the weight of what I know pressing on me. My father's empire is vast, and Daniel's cruelty has no boundaries. But fear is no longer enough to chain me. I've carried silence all my life, and silence nearly destroyed me. Now, every word I speak, every truth I uncover, becomes a weapon they cannot take away. And if you're listening, if you've ever been told you don't matter, if you've ever been pushed into the shadows by the very people who should have lifted you up, know this: you are not alone. The world may try to erase you, but your voice, your story, your truth is yours to protect. And once you choose to speak, no empire, no betrayal, no cruelty can take that away from you. So this is where my story pauses, but it isn't where it ends. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this: I will keep fighting for myself, for my mother's memory, for every part of me they tried to silence. Because my voice, once hidden, is finally free. And if my story touched you, if it made you feel even a spark of courage, then I ask you, don't just watch, don't just listen. Stand with me. Subscribe to this channel, join this space where voices like ours refuse to be erased. Because together, we are louder than the silence they tried to bury us under.